Wow.
Ah,
And Warren, I am going to make you the host right now. So you can go ahead with your presentation to us, which we're all looking forward to. Thank you so
okay,
much.
great. Thanks, Bobby. I'll take it from here. So can everybody see me? Because there's actually oh wait, I have something covering my face on my screen. This meeting is being recorded by the host. Got it. Okay. So welcome to my art studio. I am residing right now in my art studio, so you get to see a little glimpse of it behind me. You have to forgive me. I'm not really that savvy to the Zoom. I'm not really that familiar with the Zoom. So if there's some glitches that happen along the way, please, I beg your patience. What I'm gonna, I had announced this meeting to others and announced it as a Zoom's demo, but that's a little misleading because it's not actually a live demonstration. I'm not going to be painting like right now and then recording it for you. It's I'm just not tech savvy. I was mentioning to Bobby that I have art friends that they've turned their art studios into little television studios, and I have not done that. So what I have for you today is a pre-recorded demonstration that I'm going to play for you with the muted, and then I will narrate over it and occasionally pause and be able to sort of elaborate on what's occurring. And I welcome your questions during that time that I can sort of address questions. I think this demo will reveal my process of painting, not only from a live model, but also from how I do my more complex paintings that are more like finished painting, gallery paintings. It's because the process is essentially the same. Although I primarily work from photographic references in the gallery paintings, while the demonstration will be from a live model. So without further ado, I'm going to see if I can navigate this correctly to see if I can even get out of this Zoom, or not even sure how. Bobby, I'm not quite sure how I'm going to be doing this, but I will go over here. And
so
then
if you go down to share screen.
Oh, share screen. Okay. That's what I should have.
Don't leave our Zoom, please.
Okay. Oh, I'm trying to move this over. Okay. Share screen. Okay, I think I've done it. So let me move this over here for a moment. You can see my little, okay. I was hoping you'd see me on the right corner, but I don't see myself on the right corner. Is there a problem? Can you hear me, Bobby?
Yes, I can hear you. I'm just looking to see why the share screen's not happening.
It's not happening?
I'm going to make you the host again.
Okay.
Now try share screen.
Okay. Oh, here, desktop. Did it work?
Not yet.
Huh. I'm doing it, what I'm supposed to do.
You were the host.
I can see you, Warren. This is Caroline.
Hi, Caroline.
You're coming in really, it looks great. And Bobby looked great. Everybody looks great.
Yeah, well, I'm not getting this at my desktop on the.
I see.
So
Warren, try minimizing the meeting and then maybe it'll show your other screen, the other part of your screen.
Minimizing the meeting.
Under more, there's a place to minimize the meeting and then maybe it'll let you share.
Because usually share screen works right away, so we see whatever you have on your desktop.
Well, I don't know what's going on. So I'm gonna. Well, I hope this doesn't do something bad. I'll try it again. Share screen. And then it says desktop.
Choose that.
I'm trying to. I'm clicking it. I'm starting to panic. Oh, there it says share. Maybe that's it.
That's it. You got it.
Okay, great.
I'm going to mute myself again until you have a question.
I think I'd like to please stay close because I
Of
don't want.
course.
Okay, great. Now I see you got myself and Bobby on the right-hand side. Can everybody see this Flex logo here?
Yes.
Yes.
Everybody, okay. So this is the
Yes.
video. This is a pre-recorded video demonstration. As I mentioned, it's in time lapse, meaning it's happening very quickly, faster than real time. And it's a demonstration from a live model. Yeah, so let me just start it here. And I'll pause it if I think.
Warren, this is Jolene. When you're starting, could you do you start with a darker underpainting?
Yeah, okay. First, we'll get there in just a second.
Okay.
This is my palette. Oops. This is hold on. Okay, so I wanted to pause here for a second. This is my oil palette. It's rather dark on my screen, but that I use, and it's essentially it's a limited palette that's based on the Anders Zorn palette of the 19th century, and I sort of extended on it. And I guess the real interesting aspect of it is that I don't use the colors blue or green. It goes from white to yellow ochre to cad yellow to cad orange to cad red to terra rosa to burnt sienna to burnt umber to raw umber, and then goes straight to ivory black or bone black. And it skips any blue or green. So what that does is the coolest color on my palette will be black and white, which is you can see I pre-mixed some colors here on this palette, and you'll see it on the left, bottom left of the palette is the black and white, which is the coolest color I can achieve. Next to that is yellow ochre and black, which is a sort of a earth green, which is, if I need to have that be a little more intense, I'll add a little bit of yellow, cad yellow to that to get a more intense green if I need it. After that, I mix a tone of raw umber and white, and also raw umber, and also burnt umber and white. What that gives me is a warm gray and a cool gray. And essentially the raw, since the black and the white essentially functions as the blue, the white and raw umber functions as the gray. So I know someone just had a question. So what was the question again?
The question was for your underpainting, how you would start.
Everything starts with raw umber. And I'll be going over that again when I show the slideshow, because I have several stages of the painting in progress. So as I was telling Bobby, my process of painting this live model is identical to how I'll do a gallery painting, a more prolonged finished studio painting. And that's to start off with a underpainting in raw umber. And that's what you'll see as we move on here. So that my model is Dwight Chisholm. He was my favorite model for quite a long time. And what's amazing about him, I know it's going to be hard to believe, is he keeps up a smile for the entire 2-hour demonstration. Now, what you just witnessed there, let me go backtrack there, is I'm sort of working out the proportions of the head even before I start painting, just so, and it's the model's head sort of coincided with the proportions of the head. Anyway, so now I'm starting to start the demo in earnest. It's in raw umber, basically dividing it into light and shadow, and painting and recognizing the shadow shapes. That's all, basically just drawing with the shadow shapes. Are you able to see this okay?
I can see it great. So
Okay.
you're starting basically with 2 tones right now, the
Right.
toned canvas and then your shadow.
Correct.
She sang these songs, all of a sudden everybody started to cry. And it was then maybe the very first time
I would like to remind everyone to please mute yourself if you could, because we're picking up some extra
I
sound.
was embracing my little sister. And I was wondering whether she's old
What
enough.
color is the,
Oh.
are you painting with for the shadow?
All of this is just raw umber.
Thank you.
Oh my gosh.
I'm not able to mute people because I'm not the host, so please remember to mute yourself.
Can I mute everybody? Is that possible?
Yes, you can.
How do I do it? Oh, under
You don't
more?
want we just need people to mute. I'm looking to see who's not muted right now.
Which was inedible. They gave us boiled potatoes with the skin, with the mud on it.
Kim Fraser, could you mute yourself, please? And anybody else who isn't muted. We just want to be able to hear Warren. Thank you.
It's really weird, but I'm not seeing this as well as you guys are. Have I started painting in color? I think I
Yes.
have. Okay,
Yes,
so,
we
Yes.
started adding skin tones.
so that's sort of the paradox here is that this process is basically indirect painting. So you're doing this in stages. So maybe you complete the whole painting in just 2 values or just 1 value really. And then the next stage would be to add color. But in this case, because this demo is all within the same period of time before the paint ever dries, it's essentially a la prima, or done all at once in one sitting, which is the advantage of that is the painting never dries, so you can control the edges and the paint sort of melds into one another more harmoniously. Boy, this is because it's a time-lapse video, it's moving super fast.
Warren, what is your background in painting? How did you start out and get to this point?
I started off I graduated the Art Center College of Design in about 1981. And I was an illustration major because back in those days, if you wanted to learn how to paint realistically, you had to be an illustration major, because if you were a fine art major, all you really learned was concept and abstract approaches to painting. So in those days, that was the only avenue you really had if you wanted to paint in a more realistic fashion. So I was a professional illustrator, a freelance illustrator for 20 years. And then I segued into fine art in the late 1990s to the early 2000s, which was quite a feat for me to actually, that transition from illustration to fine art. I think it's a very common story, but it was really quite a major change for me to do that.
What, like what? Tell us, something that was in the part of the challenge.
Well, part of the challenge would be, as an illustrator, I was always painting. I knew how to paint. I was skilled at painting, but the subject matter is always decided for you. You're painting the other people's ideas rather than your own. So when you're a fine artist, suddenly you're left with the freedom to select any subject matter you choose. And that may sound easy, but as many of you may be fine artists yourself, it's a lot harder than you think. Okay, so that's done with that. If you don't mind, I think I can elaborate better when I start showing the lecture. Oh no, did I? Oh, I think I X'd out of the Zoom, Bobby. Can you still
No,
hear me?
you're still here. Thank you. You're still
Okay.
here.
I closed out the Chrome, so I think I might have eliminated the
We'll see
Zoom.
how your slideshow works. I think you said something about slideshow, but it looks like you can select each image over on the left side. And I have a wonderful presentation on my screen right now, so it isn't dark. It looks great. Thank you.
Okay. All right. So I'm not out. I didn't lose you guys. So this is the start of my slide lecture. As I was mentioning about my transition from illustration to fine art, I didn't know I knew how to paint, but I didn't know what to paint. That was the biggest question. And the way I found my subjects, as some of you who may be familiar with me, as many of you probably are, or you wouldn't be here, my two main subjects are the field workers of Monterey County, which is probably what I'm best known for. And the others are these interior paintings that were inspired by the great masters like Vermeer and Velázquez, which basically the subject matter of which is myself, my own home environment, my studio environment, my classroom environment, which I'll show you in just a moment. So I'm showing this, starting off this slideshow with a painting by Rembrandt, the self-portrait, because I feel like what I basically based my paintings on is the old masters. I feel like the study of the old masters is probably the safest approach to learning art, because I think that the old masters, their relevance is not in question. Nobody is disputing the fact that Velázquez and Rembrandt are great artists. But if you base your art on a contemporary artist or contemporary art, then you're really taking a big risk, in my opinion, because what you're doing is you're basing art on something that could be very temporary. And what's really hot and popular today may be completely forgotten in 50 years. These paintings have been around for 400 or 500 years. And these artists have been, there's no dispute about their relevance. So I wanted to start off with Rembrandt, a self-portrait by him. And this is a self-portrait of Velázquez, which is a detail from Las Manitas, which is probably one of his most famous paintings, Diego Velázquez. So these are all 17th century painters. And basically my color is based on looking at the old masters' paintings, as you'll see in observing my own paintings. So, and here's my first self-portrait done about, I think the year 2000, maybe 1999. And it was really a pivotal painting for me because it started to give me the idea of what subjects to paint, which in this case is myself, which I think the most important thing is to be able to paint things that are familiar to you. And what is more familiar to you but yourself? So painting this, I did this self-portrait in 2 sittings in Brooklyn when I lived in Brooklyn, New York, in 2 sittings in the evenings. And I put a light over my left shoulder, which simultaneously lit up my canvas and my face. And I think I was very, very happy with the results. As of course, that's a much younger version of myself, as you can see from the Zoom picture. And here's another self-portrait done about 10 years ago. I wanted to show the whole progress. I took progress steps. It was done in 7 sittings over 7 evenings. And I would start it off the first evening. I did the drawing, or basically mapped out the composition and the proportions with Vine charcoal. The nice thing about using Vine charcoal is I probably did this in about 5 or 10 minutes, and then I just retired for the evening, took a picture of it in the morning. It's, once you start painting on the Vine charcoal, it disappears. So I started the basic composition in Vine charcoal. And this was the second night, and I started in earnest in drawing with the raw umber, just like I did in the demo. So, by the way, this is all from a mirror. This is from life. None of these are from photographs. This is from a mirror, and I was working directly from a mirror. And this is the first stage, which is basically in raw umber washes. The third night, I saw that there were like mistakes. I'm not perfect, and some of the drawing was off. And so I looked to go refine it a little bit more, and shadow shapes and stuff. And this is a little bit more refined for a refined version, but still the underpainting. And I noticed myself holding the maul stick on my right hand, and I added it there because I think it really added a sort of a visual interest.
Lauren, we do have a question if you did anything to fix your charcoal drawing that you did to begin with.
No, the charcoal drawing is in Vine charcoal, which is a very soft charcoal. And you can just smear it. And the minute you start laying oil on the Vine charcoal, it does get muddy, but eventually it just disappears. That's why I used it. So it was underneath this. I don't need it anymore because I drew I did a more refined drawing using the brush, drawing with the raw umber. So the fourth day I started in earnest and I started painting in color, mainly on focusing on the head. And you can see that I painted the background around the head because I think it's important to resolve the relationship of the head and the background. So just in terms of the edges, where the softer edges recede, and then there's sharper edges that advance. So essentially I'm playing with a lot of push and pull of the sense of things receding and things advancing, which is what creates the sense of atmosphere. So I kept it all wet, all in one sitting in resolving the head. The fifth night, I think I'm on the fifth night.
We do have a question, sorry. The fine lines that we're seeing now, were they done with charcoal or were they done with the brush?
With the brush. It's all done with, I'm drawing with the raw umber. The charcoal was just a very, very quick and initial block-in stage. Now you can see I'm painting much more in earnest and a lot more has been covered. I work from top to bottom and left to right. I work from top to bottom and left to right because I want to avoid my hand or my arm getting in the way. I'm right-handed, so I'm going to work left to right. But if I were left-handed, I would probably work from right to left. And then I'm just working my way down. And this is actually the studio that I'm actually giving this Zoom meeting in. That's my bookshelf behind me. And you can see this is quite finished now, except for the right side. And the blue smock I'm wearing, that blue is achieved with the colors black and white. But when you're working with a limited palette where everything's leaning toward the warmer colors, the browns and the grays, then that black and white just screams blue. And the black I mentioned before, is ivory black or bone black. Rublev Natural Pigments makes a bone black, which is probably more the old master's black. That's almost identical to the ivory black, which has a large element of blue in it. All right, so this is probably the sixth.
And I'm going to ask again, which of the whites are you using?
I use lead white.
Okay.
And as far as it's a toxic white, it's a very heavy white. It's a white that was used by the old masters. Maybe not Rembrandt, because there's a whole documentary about how the way Rembrandt worked and the white that he developed, which is something that took days and weeks to actually create. I'm not quite sure. It's a really complicated process, but it's the most similar to what the old masters used. It is toxic, I have to warn, but it's a very heavy white, and it's, as far as I know, only one company makes it right now. I mean, Winsor Newton used to make a Kremnitz white and a flake white, but because lead is becoming they're kind of eliminating lead out of the oil properties, there's only one company I know that makes lead white, and that's Natural Pigments. They call it Rublev.
So I've got also flake white. Is that also lead white?
That flake white is lead white, but there are a lot of the companies are just replacing flake white with something called flake white substitute or something like that, or replacement, which is sort of just a copy of, I don't even know how you can copy it, but it's not actually lead white. I think this is the finished painting right here, which is hanging on my wall. And you'll see there's a palette there on the bottom right. And that really presented a challenge because I was painting it from a mirror. And in order to paint that palette, I'd have to sit down on my seat. So I'd have to constantly stand up and look in the mirror to see myself, see the palette from a higher perspective, and then sit down in order to paint the bottom part of the canvas. So it was like kind of painting from memory in a way, because I'd have to occasionally stand up, look at the palette from a higher perspective, come down and kind of paint from memory. So this is a self-portrait inspired by Rembrandt, if you remember, or Velázquez, very reminiscent of the old masters. And it was done entirely from a mirror.
So we have another question about your lead white. There's interest in it, and just knowing the differences, like what makes you choose lead white rather than it's an old master.
I used to use titanium white like everybody else, but at the suggestion of an artist friend, he used lead white. He recommended it. At that time, it was called Kremnitz white. I tried it out and I never turned back. It was just like, it just had a quality to it. It's much heavier. it's not quite as bright or white. I can't even put my finger on to describe exactly what it is about it that's so special, but it works. It just feels so much better, especially when you're painting on oil primed linen, which is what I paint on. So I paint on oil primed linen, which is the old masters used. I paint with lead white. So it's just, I wish I could give you a better explanation, but it just feels much better. I just liked it. I never turned back once I started using it 20 years ago. This is another painting by an old master in a way. It's an American old master, Eastman Johnson from the 19th century. And it's a painting called the Young Sweep. And one of the interesting things about Eastman Johnson for me, he was one of the founders of the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York. But on top of that, he painted basically genre scenes of 19th century Americans, but also included in that were African Americans that he documented, which in the 19th century were slaves, which I think is such a brave subject matter and something that he documented that is now for us to, that has been preserved. And so this subject is the Young Sweep. And so in my class, I taught at the Academy of Art now for 20 years. And when I was teaching my painting class, I had a model who looked similarly to me, and I dressed her up in a hoodie and made her and posed it in the exact same position as the Young Sweep, but from a side view. And I think, I don't know, this is just one of my favorite paintings, I think. And this was done with the same palette that I've been using. So the denim or the bluish hoodie is achieved with the black and the white. The denim pants are achieved with the black and the white as well. This is a portrait I did of my neighbor, Ed Leeper. For those of you who live in Monterey County, many of you may be familiar with him.
To go on this transport. The mother and daughter went another direction.
I think we have someone again, not mute it, please. Otherwise, we're going to hear your conversation.
Yeah, and so this is a painting of Ed Leeper. Is any of you familiar with Ed Leeper? He passed away, really? He passed away about maybe 10 years ago, but he was quite a well-known artist in the Monterey area. Maybe if this will jog your memory, he would go about driving this bright yellow truck and parking it on the highway, let's say the entrance to Holman Highway, with all these signs of protest against some sort of he was a political activist. He'd say, things like veterans against war or whatever. And he was such a paradox because he was a Army veteran and yet he was a protester of all wars. And I thought he was a fascinating person. So I did a portrait of him and I started it off with the raw umber, just like I did with the self-portrait. So I complete the whole painting in raw umber and then basically just add color to the areas of light. This is the finished portrait. So you'll see that the color is only added to the areas of on the light side of the form. So the shadows all share the same color and same value in color, meaning the raw umber. I didn't add any color to the areas of shadow. And there's only the accent of red on the sweater in the center of the V. That's achieved with Terra Rosa. So that's a really earth red. But because of the limited palette, when it's surrounded by all these neutrals and browns, it just really screams red, even though it's not actually red.
We do have a question as to why you don't use blue. Why, what moved you that way, or what made you choose to limit?
The study of the great masters. The paintings I showed you earlier, painters like Rembrandt and Velasquez utilized a limited palette. They had access to more colors, but they chose not to. It was a informed decision on terms of what kind of emotion and the mood that you were trying to convey. And that's what I try to do. Is I work a limited palette because that's my color sensibilities, and I am studying the old masters to be influenced by what they did. And it's sort of, to me, it's not unsimilar to like black and white photography, where for some reason, black and white photography is more powerful than color photography. It's more artistic. evokes more emotion and mood and just power. If for that same reasons, I think me working with a limited palette achieves something similar. Oh, here's a detail of the portrait. And you can see that I applied a lot of impasto paint, which means a real thick paint, with the palette knife on the areas of light, such as the hair and the mustache and beard, or maybe the highlight of the rim of the glasses. So the really heavy impasto is applied in the areas of light only, not in shadow. Shadow would be the opposite. Shadow would be where it's more transparent and smoother. And there's in the shadow, light is where the property of color, form, and texture is, and shadows are the exact opposite. But you'll see that the shadows of the painting is what unifies everything. The shadow of the face, the shadow of the leather jacket, the shadow of the denim pants, they're all the same. So they all share the same color and value, which is what helps unify the painting. This is another painting from life done at the Academy of Art in 3 sittings. It's a man named Otieno who dressed in this African garb. I'd asked him if he would wear this normally, and he said he would, and I thought, great. So this is the first stage done primarily in raw umber again, with a little bit of washes of color just to sort of lay down some local color and a mid-tone. This was the end of the first day, done in about 5 hours. The second sitting was pretty much almost finished. And then the last day, I was able to achieve really deep and dark blacks. Again, the orange costume has really heavy impasto paint.
We have a question about what medium you might use.
All of these are oil paintings, oil on canvas.
I mean, like Gamsol or
Oh, the actual brand of the paint?
no, not the brand of the paint, but do you use any oil, like
Oh yeah,
extra added oil?
I use linseed oil as my medium. That's the only medium I use. I also use Gamsol, the mineral spirits, as as my thinner. Okay, these are introducing my interior paintings. I'm showing a painting by Vermeer just to show the historical references. One of the interesting things about Vermeer to me is that he's accredited with only painting like 36 pictures in his entire lifetime. I'm sure he painted more than that, but that's all the scholars have discovered. Yet it just shows you that quality over quantity, because I know so many artists that are boasting of painting 100 paintings a year, that sort of thing. And to me, that's not what's important. What's important is the quality of the painting. I mean, Vermeer painted 36 pictures, and we all know his name has lasted, and his renown has lasted for hundreds and hundreds of years. So it's really the quality of the painting and not the quantity that's important. This is Diego Velázquez, which is Las Manitas. We saw a detail earlier, which I feel shows such sense of depth and atmosphere. I think Rembrandt said that Velázquez could paint air better than anybody. What he really meant by that was he could paint a sense of space and atmosphere. Or maybe I think he said he can paint an empty room better than anybody. This is another early self-portrait. This was done with the aid of photography in this case. It's an early portrait of myself with my wife walking across the room with my oldest son. She was carrying my oldest son at that time. Some of these paintings are, you would think nobody would ever purchase these paintings, but this painting was purchased. And I mean, it's such a personal painting, obviously to me, but somebody else has it hanging in their house somewhere, which is a little humorous to me. This is a self-portrait by Anders Zorn, the originator of the Zorn palette, which is the palette that my palette is based on, the 4 colors. You can even see it on his palette that he's holding, which is white, yellow, ochre, red, and black. So I use this as inspiration for my own self-portrait here, which I just flipped it. And this painting won some major awards, if I may say, and was published on the cover of American Artist magazine. This is a painting by Fantin Latour in the 19th century. He was really good friends with the Impressionists. And it's a portrait of Manet, and he's surrounded by Monet and Degas and all the famous Impressionists that we're familiar with, paying homage to their master Manet. And I used this composition to compose my own composition using my students at the Academy of Art, which is how I was able to create this painting. And some of the students in the background went on to renown on their own, particularly the woman on the left. Her name is Hope Rayleigh, and she's now the current fine art director of the Laguna School of Art and Design in Laguna Beach. So you can see the influence. I've just basically copied the composition and the colors and made my own painting. And of course, I used myself in replace of Manet.
We have a question. Is Turb or Gamsol the only medium you use? I don't know about thinning paintings, and about thumbnails. And
Well,
and
nowadays I used to use Turpenoid. Now I use Gamsol, the mineral spirits, but that's only on the first pass. Once you start to get color on it and the oil, put the oil color on in earnest, that's when you start to use the linseed oil, your medium. Wow. And whatever that medium may be. Some people like, I don't know, what is that thing called? The one that quick drying medium.
Oh yeah, like liquid,
whatever medium you use. Might be, I can't remember. There's several different kinds of mediums that people use, but I just use linseed oil only, which is very harmonious with the oils because all the oil paints actually carry the linseed oil within the oil colors.
We were asked to, if you could move your little cursor off the painting image.
Okay.
I was wondering what it was there at one point too. So thank you.
Well, this way I can point out things too. So that's nice to know that I have that.
Well, use a pointer. That's great.
Yeah, I'll use it as a pointer.
Yes.
This is a painting called, was originally called Artist and Muse, but I renamed it The Discussion. And it depicts my wife in my studio, actually practically at the very spot that I'm sitting on right now, discussing my painting I'm working on, which happens to be the very painting that they're sitting within. She's my greatest confidant. I think it's always important to have somebody you trust to, give their opinion of your art. And she's the one for me. Not that she's an artist, but she's very brutally honest. And sometimes our discussions about my art are not all that, well, sometimes there's a sense of tension in our discussions. So I tried to create that a little bit of sense of tension in the relationship between the artist and his wife, in this case.
Mute it. So we have a question about the painting with the students, if you used a photo for that. And then how did you paint this painting with your,
all of these interior, now I'm incorporating photography, I must say. So most of these paintings are used with the aid of photographic references. I'd like to quote Norman Rockwell a little after the slideshow. I can't really say it in the right words. I have the quote somewhere on my desktop and I'd love to show it to you. But I guess in my own words, he was basically expressing that he said, I don't expect anybody to follow my advice, but it's really best to learn to paint without photographs and until you're able to function wholly as an artist. And only then should you start to incorporate the use of photographs, is what he said. And that's certainly what I kind of did. And I didn't talk about that in the beginning, but the reason why I was showing all my paintings from life was because in the beginning of my career as a fine artist, I only painted from life. I did not paint from photographic references. And I just adopted this dogma that it couldn't be real art unless it was painted from nature. And it was pretty much the philosophy of most artists that coming out of New York. I was living in New York for 10 years, and that's where I met my wife, and that's where I really developed as an artist. And that was what I brought back with me when I came back to California. And to me, using photographic references, although I did use them as an illustrator, was a no-no. But it was when I first moved to California from New York, I met a lot of other artists in Los Angeles, and they were using photographic references, and it really shocked me because I was shocked because they were so good and they were able to create such quality art using photographic references. And so and they were much younger than me. I was probably in my early 40s and they were like in their early 20s. And I was like, my God, and they really influenced me. And so I started to try using photographic references to create fine art at that point. And so most of these are from photographic references. All the paintings of the early figures that I showed were from live models. All my still lifes and all my landscapes are from nature or from life. I'm not showing any of them here. I could later, but they're not in this slideshow. There's another interior of my wife arriving. I call this returning home. And this is our house here in Monterey. And she's coming back from her long walks in the evening, which were her only breaks from, we had young children at that time. They're big now, but they were really young at that time. And her only respite was to take some time on her own, was basically taking long walks in the evening. So this is a very personal painting. This is another interior this was a student of mine. Her name is Xu Ping. She now lives in China. It's called Artist in Her Studio. And it just sort of depicts her studio and her paintings. And you can see by the paintings on the easels that she's pretty good. And I used the limited palette again. And this sort of bluish skylight and the blue that's achieved here, I'm pointing out with the arrow, was all achieved with black and white. Because when you surround the whole painting with all these grays and browns, the minute you put down any kind of color like black and white or even a terra rosa, it's going to just magnify the color. If I were to use actual blue, I think it would look too saturated, maybe looking like almost electric, like neon. This is a painting of my colleague, Xiaoming Wu. I don't know if you're familiar with, he's a Chinese artist living in San Francisco who also teaches at the Academy. He's a brilliant artist. He specializes in painting women. And so this was his classroom, and I changed the model from a male model to a female model because that was what he specialized in, which had the unintended result of having me to change all the canvases, subject of all the canvases that the students were working on, from a man to a woman. What I really like about this painting is the quality of light. It's sort of lit with this artificial fluorescent lights on top, in contrast to the real chiaroscuro warm light on the model. It's another self-portrait. It's titled Father and Son, and it's fictional. My son really didn't sit there at my feet doing drawings, but he would be outside my studio, maybe just lying down, hanging out, waiting for me to come out. So it's in spirit, I think it's true, but it's sort of a fictional scene. And right now I am talking to you from exactly where my son is drawing. I'm sitting on the seat right where he would be drawing in that painting.
What sizes are a lot of your paintings?
This one's, I think I know this is exactly 24 by 36. And these paintings are really personal, like this one, and I did another one where I had both my sons in the painting. I swear that I'll never sell them, but inevitably somebody talks me into selling it to them. And then they never allow it to be exhibited. Like this particular painting the patron refused to have it exhibited or loan it. So nobody will ever see it except on my slideshow or my book. Okay, this is a little bit of departure. I was commissioned by an advertising agency about 10 years ago, maybe 10 years, maybe less than that, to do a painting for Jameson Whiskey. They wanted me to do a 18th century inspired painting of their founder, John Jameson, and these acts of heroism to protect his distillation process. This is not my drawing. This is by their advertising comp artist, who then they provided this to me to do the painting for the idea. When I told them I was interested in doing, they hired other well-known realistic artists to do other paintings, but I was the only one willing to do this idea, which they were ecstatic about, because nobody wanted to do this. They saw all these figures and nobody wanted to do it, but I wanted to do it. So they gave me all the money to do a photo shoot, because they knew that's how I had to do the painting. And here's the photo shoot. I did this in Carmel Valley at some winery there. I went and rented out their space, and there were some models from Los Angeles that drove up, and local models and friends of mine. And we had a wardrobe and dressed them all up and had a professional photographer. That's me directing the shoot on the left. And this is the sketch I turned into the client. This is black and white pencil on a gray mat board, which works beautifully because the client was constantly making me do changes, like moving hats and removing clothing off the lone woman on the left. And I'd have an eraser, and I'd just be an electric eraser, just erasing the drawing and redrawing it, several times. And then from there, I did this color study. This color study was never shown to the client because I didn't want to give them the opportunity to have dictate any of the color and to tell me, oh, well, we want that to be blue or we want this to be red. So this was purely for myself. This is the underpainting I did. And once I completed this, the client was very, very confident that the painting was well on its way. They gave me 22 days to do the finished painting, which normally this would probably take me 6 months to paint, but I had 22 days to do it.
What was the size of this painting?
This is probably the largest painting I've ever done. I'm guessing maybe, I really don't know, but I would guess maybe 60 inches long or longer. I can't really say, almost the size of a door. This is the stage painting in progress. At one point, they called me up and they said they wanted to see the painting, which was, I think, if many of you are fellow artists, it's really an awkward thing to show your painting in progress, but I had it photographed so they could see it. But it reveals the process. You can see all the unfinished areas of raw umber and the areas done in color. So I'm glad I have this stage. And you can see how I started to paint the background around the figures to have everything relate. This is the finished painting, which I'd like to note that the ad agency paid me a certain amount of money, not a bad paycheck, but they didn't buy the original art. I ended up selling the original art for 4 times what they paid me.
Wow.
Which was not a bad payday, to say the least. And so they used this for on billboards. This is how it was used. It was published. It was published in the city of New York City on all the subways. So millions of people saw this on the subways in New York. It was also published in the city of San Francisco and Paris. So looking back at it, it's really fun to see the results. So I'm glad I took it on. Okay, these are some of my paintings. You might be familiar with some of the scenes here if you're from Monterey. This one's called Flower Girl, and it's done at the entrance of Holman Highway before they did the roundabout. So basically, this is now extinct because this would never happen, because this is now all, as you know, what's happening at the roundabout. So I witnessed this, and I pulled my car over and I tried to take pictures of this girl selling flowers. And she refused to have her picture taken. She just walked away from me immediately. So I took pictures of her walking away from me just so I could see what she looked like, what she was wearing, and I recreated the whole thing. So that's basically how a lot of my paintings are done. Is I take pictures of different scenes, but when I get the pictures back to my studio, there's not a painting there. I can't create a painting from it. So I have to recreate the whole picture. I hire models, I dress them in hoodies, And I recreate the picture. So that's how I was able to create this painting. You know, her selling flowers with cars whizzing by, not taking any notice. This was a home. I did quite a few paintings of the homeless. This one is was done not far from Home Depot. If you, some of you might be recognized at highway entrance. It was done for an exhibition called Hard Times, which is curated by the director of the Springville Museum in Utah. So it started off in Utah and ended up, the exhibition ended in New York. But the theme was to paint, I think it was about 2010, it was to paint the recession times that were reminiscent of the 1930s depression. So this is what I chose to paint. This subject, as well as this one, with this man was a homeless man right outside of the Bagel Bakery in Pacific Grove. So although it looks like any man USA, because it could be Ohio, it could be New York, it could be San Francisco, but it's Pacific Grove. How do you like that? So a lot of people remark on this painting that the whole painting is done in this sort of old masters style, but that Coke cup just screams 20th century all of a sudden. The red of the Coke cup is achieved again with the Terra Rosa, not with any kind of red. It's more of an earth red. Here's a detail of the head, where again, you can see the impasto paint applied to the areas of light, like his beard, his hat, and the wall behind him, the texture of the wall behind him.
So with some of your models who are homeless or they're on the street, you said that the girl wouldn't let you take a photo. So with these people, do you take photos? How do you find models?
Well, this was not easy. I mean, there's another painting I did, which I don't think it's the next one. I'll show it to you later, where I actually recreated it again, and I had to hire a model to play a homeless person. But
Did you ask the guy to take his picture or offer him money?
Yeah, I did. And actually, it was a very tricky situation because I went to an area where the homeless gather and I asked them if I could take a picture of them and they refused. And I'd say, why? They'd go, well, because I don't want to remember these times. I want to forget these times I'm living in. So what I found is what this man was on there, and I just walked up to him and put money in his cup. And the minute I put money in his cup, I said, is it okay if I take photographs? And he was like, sure. You know, so that was the key. If you give them money, then they'll warm up to you and they start to, you know, they'll allow you to take pictures. So that's what I was able to do with this instance, as well as in this instance. I offered him money and I paid him. And he was, you know, he's willing to pose if you give him a little money. This is another detail of the same painting of the trash can, which illustrates the impasto applied on the highlight of the metal part of the trash can. If it's metal, highlights will be brightest when it's reflecting off of metal or something reflective like that, glass. Then you can use practically a pure white. On a face, which is softer, and it's going to be much more subdued. But anything reflective, it'll be even the brightest. This is that painting I was going to mention. I witnessed a scene of a homeless man along a beach writing a letter, and it just totally stunned me. I felt like it was a painting right out of the 19th century, a scene out of the 19th century. I took some pictures, but again, when I brought it home, it wasn't a painting. So I had to recreate the whole thing by hiring a model. This guy, his name is Crow from Santa Cruz, and he came down all the way from Santa Cruz to pose for this. And that's my dog, who happened to just sort of stumble along the way. And I thought it worked out perfectly. I was painting for an exhibition for Winfield Gallery at that time. I think it was about 2015. And it was a show of my recent field worker paintings. But I was totally distracted by doing this painting, which took me months to do. And I mean, in retrospect, I was thinking, I was so panicked. I was thinking, I have a show to paint for, and yet I'm spending all my time painting this homeless man on the beach, which I know nobody's going to buy. And I thought, well, but why? But I had to do it. I was just obsessed that I had to paint this picture. And when I exhibited, it sold the opening night. So how do you like that? So you never know. And I sort of juxtaposed it with the pier on the back, and I put a yacht over there on the far right, upper far right, to sort of contrast rich and poor. This is a painting by Bruegel from the 16th century, or which is, I think, the earliest paintings of field workers. So it just shows the sort of historical precedent of the subject of field workers. It's been done for hundreds and hundreds of years. So my idea of painting our local field workers is basically just a contemporary version of what's been done for centuries. The most famous field worker painting would be Francois Millet from France. He did paintings that were considered iconic today, like this is the Angelus, which was later used on just about anything you could think of, published on wallpaper, puzzles, you name it, it was published on it. So it became very, very iconic, I think. No, the Gleaners, of course, many of you are familiar with. And this is a painting by Jules Breton, a contemporary of Millet, but he painted field workers in a much more idealized way. I tend to favor more Millet, which is painting them exactly as they are. Very honest depiction of peasant field workers. And then entering a little into the later 19th century, this is American Winslow Homer, who painted cotton field workers. I'm just showing the historical progression. This is by Eastman Johnson, Cranberry Harvest, 19th century American, all the way up until Thomas Hart Benton, which is more like, mid 20th century. And then now it's the start of my own paintings. It's the title Bus Stop. A lot of my paintings I do, people then inform me of what a lot of information about this subject, more that I've become very informed about the subject by other people. For instance, the housing behind the painting, it's rather controversial because of the idea of how close housing can be next to farm fields because of the pesticide dangers. This end of day, this is about, this was a day scene that I turned into a night scene off Highway 1 toward probably closer to Watsonville, or no, actually Moss Landing. Many of you probably recognize the locale. This one's just I called it Madonna. It's probably one of my most idealized fieldworker painting of a subject of a woman worker that I actually hired a model. So she was a model that posed, and then I used some photographic references for the background. It's picking strawberries, and there was something sort of spiritual about the painting. I felt the pose or the look on her face. This is like, I have my reservations about this painting. It's Twilight in Santa Cruz. It's a Brussels sprouts harvest north of Santa Cruz along the coast of Santa Cruz. I got permission to go on and to the fields, and I think I really like the painting mainly because of this one portrayal of this one worker. A lot of it is I'm not quite that happy with. It's sort of the lighting is so flat. It's at dusk and it's more of an indirect light. These workers carrying these metal bins, I learned later these bins are like, when they're full of Brussels sprouts, they weigh more than 50 pounds. So they're carrying these, that's why you only see men out here. Same thing for the artichoke harvests. But the portrait I did of this man here makes the whole painting worth it to me. This is an artichoke harvest, the end of day. Many of you recognize Moss Landing in the background. This is a good example of a painting that has heavy impasto in the areas of light, really obvious supply of application of palette knife and impasto paint. And the areas of shadow are all essentially, in areas in light, should I say. The areas in shadow are all in using basically raw umber, which unites when you're doing, all these figures of 12 figures, they're united as one group when they all share the same shadows in terms of the value and color. I've had people remark on this particular painting that you can see the paint dripping on the bottom, and I allow that to happen where you can see the canvas because it kind of just shows the process and it adds interest, I think. A lot of people remark on that and they like it. Here's a close-up where you can maybe see the application to paint a little better. Oh, this one is called another artichoke field, but in a different process of the harvest where they're watering the holes to put the plants in. This is an artichoke harvest. Again, instead of metal bins, they're carrying these backpacks, and once they're full of artichokes, they weigh a ton. So that's the reason why the people harvesting artichokes are all men. And I love the colorful clothes and dress that they wear. It's really fun to paint. This is sort of a somewhat more conceptual painting for me, because if some of you may be familiar with the cardboard cutouts and off the highways of Salinas that depict field workers and growers in large format where they're maybe 40 feet high, and so I wanted to depict those cutouts in the fields because there was a large contrast to me of what they look like and sort of their gap clothing and smiles compared to the reality of the field workers, bent backs and heavy clothing, layers of clothing. So I titled this painting Imitation of Life, which is the name of an old movie as well, I think. This is a process, how I work. I do color studies first. So this is a small color study, probably about 8 by 10. And then after that, this is the finished version, which is about 30 by 40. So you can see the difference. And it's pretty similar. One of the byproducts of doing these small studies is they sell really well, primarily because they're significantly less expensive than the larger versions. And I think they take on more significance. A lot of they're looser and they're more spontaneous, and I think they have a charm to them that the larger finished paintings do not. But regardless of that, it's a requirement for me to do these studies in order to do the larger versions. This is Approaching Storm. This is a painting by Millet that's in the Boston Museum called Harvesters Resting. And so I did my own version in the exact same size. I can't remember, maybe 51 inches or something. And I did a little sketch. This is out of memory in a sketchbook with pen, just to work out my composition. And I use this to direct my models, who then use this to, like I'd say, that's you there, and that's how you're supposed to pose. That's you over there. And I'm pointing, it's not working. I tell them to pose in these different positions based on Millet's after doing the thumbnail. And then I would do a photo shoot. So these are the models at the Academy of Art. Some of them are students dressed in hoodies. Some of them are models. And I had them all posing for me. And this is the finished painting on the bottom. This is the sketch prior to the finish. It's graphite on paper. And this is this color study, which is about 8 by 10, and the finished painting. So these, as you recall, all of these figures were photographed indoors, and I just placed them in the outdoors. And I found a location, kind of like finding a location for a movie set. I found this landscape off Davis Road in Salinas, and I used it as the backdrop for this painting. So that's what I encourage, what I'd like to see artists do more of, is to come up with a concept, an idea, and then make it happen, rather than just depend on random photography from a trip to Paris or a trip to Italy or whatever. And they artists take pictures, and they just are basically left up to random chance that they happen to take a nice picture that they want to do a painting of, which ends up being just basically painted postcards, in my opinion. So this is an idea, and then I do everything I can to make it a reality. I go to the trouble of buying these hoodies and hiring people to pose for me, and photographing every little detail to get the final result.
I have a
This-
question. I have a question about your underpainting for this, for the interior shots. So it was a very dark toning that you did of your canvas. What do you do here for the outside, for sunny skies like you just had?
I'm not quite sure what you're asking. Could you?
About toning the painting, I was just wondering, the finish of this, I could see some of the underpainting looked a little warmer and glowier in the trees, and then up in the sky. I was just wondering how you start a painting like this. Do you still start it with a dark toned?
Yeah, I do use, it's all done in raw umber initially. And I mean, the lighting in here is, I mean, it's very dark, but this is intentional. I mean, the painting, this is the way I wanted it to look. I don't want it to look like what reality is, because I'm not a slave to reality. I mean, if I want it to be dark and moody and create this sense of a much darker mood than the reality of it, which would be in bright sunlight, I suppose. So a lot of the darker light scenes set in the daytime, I deliberately make them darker. This is a similar painting. It's called Lunch Break of it's a break at a artichoke harvest. It was purchased by the Monterey Museum, so that you can see this original at the Monterey Museum somewhere. Used to hang at La Mirada. I don't know if it's there anymore. It's probably in storage. That's one thing, is I've had the good fortune of my paintings are in 2 museum collections, and in both instances, they bought the paintings, they purchased them. They didn't, usually as an artist, you have to donate them, but they actually purchased these paintings. I was driving back from Los Angeles with my family, and I witnessed this field worker seated down resting. And it reminded me of the 19th century paintings by Millet and Bastien Lepage. This is Bastien Lepage's painting. And this is, oops, I don't have the Millet one, but it's very reminiscent. So when I saw this woman posed, or not posed, but just seated that way, I was like, that's a 19th century painting right there. And I had pulled my car over and I started taking pictures. But as it is in my habit, I took the pictures home and I thought, this isn't a painting. So I recreated the whole thing and hired a model to pose for this painting. And this is the color study. This is the finished painting. This is probably my favorite fieldworker painting, Fall Tilling. And that's, a lot of these things, like with the cursor, I can show that this is my wife's hat. That's my own backpack. And can see the reality of the situation here in the finished painting. The color that, I don't copy this color. I create my own color, which is more like the old masters. And you can see that I changed the model from this woman to my own model, because I just thought this was more truthful in a way. John Steinbeck once wrote that sometimes a lie can be closer to the truth. And I think that he achieved that in his fiction. And I feel like I'm achieving the same thing in a painting. This is what my vision was, and this is the reality of it. This is a color study for a painting called Onion Field. Something I witnessed on the way to Hollister. I never saw anything like it. It looked like golden. It looked like wheat. And I took pictures with my wife's iPad because I didn't have my camera with me, but the quality of the iPad was really bad. And so the picture quality was horrible. So again, when I got back home, I couldn't make a painting of it. So what I did is I used pictures I had already, these pictures of a carrot harvest and a model over here, and I used them for the foreground figures to create that sense of depth, the foreground, the middle ground, and the background, to create a sense of depth and atmosphere. So all these little figures were done with the photographs I took from my wife's iPad, but I had much better references I had collected earlier, and I changed them from picking carrots to picking onions, or to wrapping onions, or whatever it is that they do. This painting was purchased by the Hilbert Museum of California Art in Orange, California. This is the finished painting. You can see heavy impasto applied on the ground. The way I got the effect of the onion, strands of onion, or kind of like these things here, was I actually got a palette knife and I scratched the paint out. This is a painting. It's called, what is it? It's called Give Us Our Daily Bread. There was the owner of a winery company in Watsonville who approached me and asked me to paint his workers at his winery because he wanted to use it for a wine label. And I accepted because it gave me permission to go onto his winery, and all of his workers posed for my painting. I mean, how good is that? It would have cost me a fortune to hire, a dozen models to pose for me. And I had all the workers and their children all pose for me for their boss. And so I set them up in this fashion. And the only stipulation is the winery owner wanted me to include this gazebo, which was a major landmark of the winery. Regan Winery is what it's called. And I was able to paint this picture. One of the other things, he really wanted to show the joy of the people, is what he conveyed to me. And that was something I didn't want to do. I didn't want to show, a bunch of workers, in some kind of showing how wonderful their life is. And I wanted to show the reality of it, the truth of their life. And so I refused to follow his direction. And then I threw my dog in here for the fun of it. It's sort of like my signature. Like Alfred Hitchcock is including himself, while I'm putting my dog in every painting. This is back to an interior. This will show my entire process of painting. Starts with a thumbnail drawing. I wanted to show a fictional scene. It's a fictional scene of myself in my studio, surrounded by my friends and family. So basically, I'm supported by all the people who I consider important to me, at least at that time, because times have changed. I have my father coming in, my book publisher standing over me, my assistant at the time here, which is all kind of in the past because my assistant's now moved to Southern California. I'm kind of not quite as close to my publisher as I used to be. I have my wife and older son here, my younger son here, my neighbors over here, myself. So that was my idea. So I had to bring in all these individuals into my studio and photograph them individually, which is where these are the photographs I used. I didn't actually create this Photoshop here. My younger son is a tech whiz, and he did this for me, not for the purpose of painting. I didn't use this to paint the picture, but for the purpose of showing the process. So what I'm trying to say is I don't use Photoshop, but I used it simply to illustrate how I worked, was creating these photographs and sort of composing them together. So basically, for your benefit, this Photoshop was made by my son. So these are my neighbors. He's a preparator. He used to be the preparator for the Natural History Museum in New York. His wife, Royce, they live close by. And he's now the was the preparator for the Natural History Museum in Civic Grove. He used to work for the Modern Museum, This is my assistant, Derek Olinger. That's my wife and my elder son, my youngest son here, my book publisher, John Fleskis, and my father, who's now 95, 96, and he posed for this picture. He was great. He was really hamming it up, and I showed him the sketch and he knew exactly what to do. And it's very Rockwellian, you know, in terms of the head peering into the composition. This is the sketch I did prior to the finished painting, working out everything. And this is the color study I did. So I do every step that's required to reach the final. The color study. This is the underpainting. You had mentioned, Bobby, about whether or not I do the dark underpainting, and this is the underpainting before I apply color. And like the Jameson whiskey painting, I took a picture of the painting in progress here. And you can see I'm the unfinished areas and how I'm painting from left to right. And the finished painting is here. I forgot the title of the painting. I renamed it recently. I can't recall. This is also really one of my largest paintings to date. This is an inspiration. It's a painting by Cezanne. I think it's sold for some record, 400 million or something outrageous like that on an auction. And I thought, wait a second, I want to do my version of this Cezanne painting, because if this auctioned off for 800 million, then I want to do my version of the painting. And so I came up with the idea, and this is also a similar painting by Norman Rockwell called Checkers, which is one of my favorite paintings as well. And I used these two paintings to inspire my own idea, which was to do a painting of some drifters and homeless people at Custom Plaza. Many of you are familiar with Custom Plaza. There's a lot of drifters, homeless people that hang out there. So I went out there with this sketch, armed with this sketch, and I showed it to the homeless people that were gathered out there, and I asked them if they would pose. And they enthusiastically agreed, and they all posed for me based on this thumbnail sketch. And unfortunately, or should I say, predictably, when I got home with the photographs, I didn't like them. And so I had friends pose instead for half the figures. So I did this sketch, and like only this guy, these three are the real thing. All the rest of them were people that I had pose. This is Michael Houston. Maybe some of you know Michael Houston. He's fairly well known. And that's my older brother, James Chang, who I got to pose because I wanted to create a feeling of Mac and the Boys from Cannery Row, like in contemporary Mac and the Boys. So I really wanted to have an Asian man in the center. So my brother seemed to fit the bill for that. And that's actually a real homeless dog. And the next step was to do the color study. And then here's the underpainting in raw umber. And this is the color stage half finished. Working from left to right, working top to bottom. I paint the backgrounds first and then work my way toward the foreground. And this is the finished painting. These are just some random recent paintings. Well, anyways, these are recent paintings. They're rather small. This one's a nocturne. I'm closing in on the end of the lecture. This one's called Flower Stand. It's a scene outside Los Angeles. I think that the use of the sort of grays and browns that dominate this painting, the minute I use these primary colors on the umbrella, it just screams, So basically using less color means more color. The more color you use, if I used bright blue over here and bright red over here, that would subdue the power that I'm using on the umbrella, the focal point. So more color is actually less color, in my opinion. Another recent painting, it's titled Essential Workers, obviously by the presence of the masks. I hired models to pose for these two, and then used a scene from references I had to depict the background.
Two questions. Do you basically finish one section of the painting completely before moving on, or, you said you work top to bottom and left to right. Is it finish as you go, or do you come back?
Sometimes it's a little bit of both. I mean, sometimes I may cover the whole painting with a wash of color just to get a feeling of what the color is going to be. Other times it's basically done the way some of the previous stages showed, which were basically I complete a complete underpainting in raw umber, and I painted in sections like a puzzle. Like every day I'll come over and look at the painting and say, I think I'm going to paint this passage here today. Or maybe I might start and I'll paint, it's all completed in raw umber, by the way. So then I'll say, I'm going to paint the sky and the mountains first. So I paint the sky and the mountains. I might lay some wash of color over the fields. And then I might paint the green of the fields and the trees behind it, which is the middle ground. The second day, maybe the third day, I'll paint this middle ground scene right here all in one day. And then I'll start to tackle the foreground, which takes a little bit longer because there's more detail, and the subject of the portraits of the people take a little more time. So the answer is yes and no, because sometimes I'll lay down washes of color over certain areas prior to finishing it.
And there's another question about, do you transfer your drawing to the canvas or redraw the drawing?
I transfer the drawing in lightly, and then I finish it with a brush, meaning I do the under drawing with a brush. So basically I kind of map it out where the things are going to be placed with maybe, it might be pencil, it might be charcoal, it might be vine charcoal. And then once I have that down, then I start to do the drawing in earnest with the raw umber and a brush. And that's why sometimes the underpainting takes longer than the actual painting, the actual oil painting does. These underpaintings that I show you, they take a lot of time. So some of these paintings take 3, 4, 6 months to paint. I had a conversation with an artist friend this morning, and we were talking about how expensive my paintings are. But I was telling him, when you think about it, I'm spending 4 months on the painting, and I'm only going to make half the money when it sells to the gallery. So that's really not that much money if you think about 4 months of work. It's not I'm not making the killing that you think I am. This is my latest painting. It's in the gallery now at the Winfield Gallery in Carmel. It's titled Invisible People. There was a novel by, I don't have it in front of me, unfortunately. I would love to show it to you. It's called Invisible Man. It's a famous 20th century novel by an African-American man. I forget his name, but he wrote a novel, basically a semi-autobiographical novel called Invisible Man. Obviously, he felt in the 20th century he was invisible. And so I titled this painting Invisible People, because a lot of times these are people you see driving by the highway maybe every day, and you never notice them, or people just don't even take notice that they're there.
Someone said Ralph Ellison wrote it.
Ralph Ellison, that's right. They're smart. They're smarter than me. Yeah.
Well, collective memories here. And then someone asked too if you use a grid at all.
No, I have, but I don't. And these are my book that was published 10 years ago by Fless Publications. You can buy a copy. I'm off my website, because what happened is I kind of had a falling out with my publisher in the light that he kind of stopped attending to my books. Like if I had a museum that wanted my books, that they wanted the books into the museum store, he wouldn't service it. He wouldn't, because he wasn't making enough money off my books. He was kind of like just not doing anything, not really working for me. So I made a deal with him that if I could, because I actually invested my own money into the publication of the books. I told him I'd take 50% of the books and I'd sell mine and keep everything. And he can keep 50% of them, sell them and keep his share, rather than him just giving me royalties on the books. So I made that deal. So I have pile loads of my books now up in my loft. So I sell them off of my website. They're $45, and I'll let you on a little secret. I'm so grateful that if anybody buys my book off my website, that I do a little original sketch inside, as well as signing the book. And then I also sell this museum catalog from the Monterey Museum of Art. It's just paperback. So I'm giving a little plug. If anyone's interested in a live demonstration, I'll be doing one on February 7th for the Cupertino Art League. You can check my website for details. It starts at 7:30 p.m. That'll be a live demonstration in person. But concludes my my slide lecture. Are there any questions, Bobby?
How do you transfer the drawing, by eye or stencil?
I transfer it with by transferring the drawing through by putting charcoal on the back and then stenciling on top. So I just get sort of an outline. And as I mentioned, I will do I will redraw it with the raw umber and a brush. It's all redrawn, but I get the basic, because I want all the proportions to be right. I put it all down, from the original sketch, the proportions of the sketch.
Feel free to unmute yourself if you have a question you'd like to ask instead of typing.
I don't have a question, but I just wanted to thank you very much.
Oh, you're welcome. I appreciate everybody attending the lecture and for your interest. I can't see you from my end, so I imagine there's quite a few of you out there, and I really appreciate you taking the time to see my presentation.
I'm actually trying to see how to take hosting back, but it's not happening. So that would maybe help you see some people a bit more. So maybe if you stop sharing your screen, I might be able to do it.
Okay.
We'll see if that works. Recording. Looking here.
Warren, this is Caroline. Thank you so much. This was really insightful.
Oh, you're welcome.
More
And
and
thanks
more
for
every day. No.
Yeah, I'll see you in class.
Okay, you bet.
All right.
Thank you.
Take care.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I have a million questions, but it was wonderful.
All right. Well, thank you. Appreciate it. Well, why don't you give us one? Why don't you give us one of the million?
I just would. I'm sorry, my bird is really noisy in the background. I was just wondering when you're transferring, you lightly, you turn your drawing over and cover it with the charcoal and then kind of pat it down.
Well, if I do, it requires that you do the drawing the same size as the canvas. And then I put the drawing on top of the canvas. I put a little charcoal on the back and I just trace around my own drawing. It's just enough to place where the figures are going to be, like they're 2 inches from the left corner, whatnot, just the placement of where everything's going to be. And then I redraw everything all over again, which is incredibly time consuming. I redraw the whole thing using raw umber and a brush.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Good luck.
I have a question. Just as sort of as a mystery follow-up, what happened when the winery open saw that you didn't make everyone look like it was a happy Merry Christmas lunch or something?
Well, he was very, he didn't control what was happening. At one point he started to give me a little bit of art direction, and I started to say, because I didn't get paid for it. I just did it for free. So, I didn't charge anything for it. And so I said to him, well, that's fine if you want to give me art direction, but, Jameson Whiskey paid me $15,000. So, if you want to give me some art direction, you're going to have to pay for, the rights to do this painting. And that's when he just didn't bother me at all at that point. And he didn't buy the painting either. which was his loss because the painting sold. So he was constantly asking me if anyone bought the painting, and then eventually it did sell. So it was used on a wine bottle, which is pretty cool. And he didn't really give a fuss.
Thank you.
I'm kind of like scrolling through to see who's here. Oh, I see. Oh, there's Tommy. Hi, Tommy. You made it.
Yeah.
Yes. So it's the Tommy emailed me time and time again to know what the time zone was, and I replied back to you, but your email kept saying this email doesn't exist. Just so you know. So that's why I called you, because that was the only way I could reach you. Anyways, thanks for coming. Where are you listening to from, or what location are you coming from?
I'm in Georgia.
Georgia. How do you like that? That's so cool. What advantages of online?
That's pretty amazing. Even with all of the like Facebook and Instagram and all those things, we get to see so much more. That's pretty amazing.
Mm-hmm.
Well, we've had some thank yous and wonderful to see the presentation today. Another family here has they're a farming family.
Mm.
With orchards and the work, and they do a lot of work themselves. She said at some point during the presentation that her sons look the same way with the hoodies and all that they're out wearing.
I have to say that eventually I did have field workers themselves come to my exhibit at the Monterey Museum. There was a 5th grade teacher from Salinas who approached me and said she wanted to bring her class because all of her students were basically the children of field workers. And so she had them all write poems about individual paintings, and they came to the museum and they recited their poems about my paintings. And all their parents also came. And to be honest, I was a little nervous because I really didn't have the audience of the actual field workers see themselves, but their reaction was so positive that it really, rest my doubts. And they were basically, they felt so proud and so, they seemed really, really happy that they were being depicted in paintings. And they felt like my paintings, I depicted them in a way that they felt like that's exactly how it feels to be out there. It was their expression. And they also shared in their stories, which I felt, but I feel like I'm not Bill Manning or, some politician, but they were really sharing in all their hardship stories with me, which was really wonderful that they trusted me that way. And I learned so much more about the people in the fields and the hardships and the things that they go through, and the stories that they had to tell. And I was just so touched that they responded to the paintings so well. Not just people with money to buy them.
I'm just typing in a little bit here about we're going to hopefully have the recording, all of it or most of it, because we're all learning with Zoom. Even though it's great, it's still a challenge.
Yeah.
Up on our YouTube channel, Central Coast Art Association, and then you'll be able to share it from there, Warren, too. And so thank you so much.
You're welcome. It's always a pleasure. I hope that you'll bring me back in person someday again.
We'd love to.
Okay, it's a deal.
Thanks.
Right,
Thanks. Time to chime in our thank yous and goodbyes. And
yeah, thank you all for coming.
Thank you very much.
Nice to meet you.
Excellent.
So I'll let you, Bobby, close it out.
Yeah, it might take you hitting end recording, because right now I'm not getting that option. So
okay.
We'll find out.
I'll click this button. So this is it. Farewell.
We'll find
Thank
out.
you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.